For those who think we've coddled the next generation, so much so that they're unprepared to face the real world, for those who are concerned that China is genetically modifying super soldiers while our military is accommodating gender reassignments, for those who are worried that everyone has lost their minds and there's no sanity left, we have good news. The voice of reason, Dr. Everett Piper, is continuing to share wisdom and insight, and his voice and platform are expanding. Not only is he a weekly columnist with the Washington Times, but he's also debuting a powerful new book designed to knock some sense back into America. Dr. Piper is also a great friend and a frequent guest in the Economic War Room. Welcome back, Dr. Piper.
Kevin, I'm delighted and honored. Thanks for having me back on. I miss you.
Well, we love seeing you, and we're glad to have you here, especially in these troubling times. I mean, as you look around the world, let's start with the bad. We do the bad, the good, and the beautiful. Let's start with the bad. What is it that you're seeing around the world that troubles you?
Well, your intro summarizes it quite well. If we think our enemies are not watching us, I've got a bridge to sell you in the desert. Of course, China is watching the way we're responding to the COVID crisis. Of course, Iran and North Korea are watching. Of course, Vladimir Putin and Russia are watching us. When you can bring an entire nation, an entire culture, the entire Western world, so to speak, to its knees by just telling them that they might get sick, then that tells you that we're not a culture of adults, we're a culture of children. That we would rather be comfortable than confronted. We would rather be safe than free. It's almost like we've taken the words of Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death, and turned it on its ear. And now we're now saying, I fear death, so take my liberty. Our enemies are watching us, and it's delusional to think otherwise. So that would be my first point in response to your question, where I'm just kind of affirming what you said in terms of China and whatnot.
Well, let's talk about that just for a second. Right? Let's think. What if we got into a war these days, a war with China or any of our adversaries' enemies? I mean, this generation, I'm concerned. This is my nightmare. I wake up screaming, thinking, are they going to get into a fight? And in the middle of the fight, wait. I didn't do that the way I wanted. Can we do over? Can we do a do-over in this battle? I mean, that's the kind of thing I fear that the coming generation is prepped for.
Well, look at the way we behave. The best predictor of future behavior is always past behavior. So how have we been behaving? The cancel culture, the culture that wants to be affirmed rather than challenged, the culture that I confronted in my first book, Not a Daycare, is a culture that is driven by feelings rather than facts. They want a degree in opinions rather than to be graded on whether or not they've acquired any level of truth in their relative majors and disciplines while they're in college. It's a generation of people that is fixated on trigger warnings, microaggressions, safe spaces. They want teddy bears and coloring books and videos of frolicking puppies in their counseling centers at Berkeley and Brown. This is all true. This isn't hyperbole. As you know, I'm not making this up. So when we teach one generation after another to be this self-absorbed and narcissistic, we shouldn't be surprised to find a bunch of self-absorbed narcissists in our culture. When we teach them to act like children where they demand to be safe rather than to be challenged, when they feel like, the helicopter parenting has taught them that mommy and daddy will swoop in and protect them from anything that makes them feel uncomfortable. So if we went to war, do you really think this generation of citizens would be prepared to sacrifice their safety, to sacrifice their comfort, to sacrifice even their health for the defense of liberty? The answer is no, because we're not even doing it right now. We've given all of those things up for the sake of just being safe and hunkering down in our own little cubicles called our homes because the government told us we were supposed to.
No, sadly, I know you're right. And the sadder thing to me is you had the best and the brightest, arguably the best students in America went to Oklahoma Wesleyan. They were great. You know, I'm still a trustee there, and I love the college, and they're great students. but we've got to prepare them for what they're facing. Another friend of mine, Dr. Eric Davidson, teaches at Baylor in the finance department, and he's talking about stakeholder capitalism so that the companies are run for the benefit of everybody rather than for the benefit of the shareholders. And that's the mindset they have going in. We've got to really arrest that mindset and get people focused on what's genuinely true, what's real, and what life is about. How do we do that?
Well, there are some old axioms that have stood the test of time because essentially they represent an eternal truth. Axioms that are real simple, such as a stitch in time saves nine, get back on the horse, no pain, no gain. Well, there's another one that you've been told 100 times, as was I when I was growing up, and that is garbage in, garbage out. You know that I like to refer to Richard Weaver's seminal work of 1948, where he titled it, Ideas Have Consequences. And as I've said before on your show, you don't even really need to read the book. Just read the cover and you get his point. What you teach in the classroom will be practiced tomorrow in your culture. Garbage in, garbage out. The solution is goodness in, and then you will have goodness that comes out. You need to teach good ideas, beautiful ideas, true ideas. You need to pursue truth because it's an objective reality. You don't want to keep rewarding people for their feelings and their opinions, even though those feelings and opinions may be built on shifting sand, to use Jesus's own parable. If you want a solid culture, if you want freedom, if you want liberty, if you want biblical justice rather than justice that's defined by society and culture, if you want those good and beautiful things, then you better teach the goodness of a biblical worldview, the rock solid foundation of the truth of Jesus Christ and the truth of Scripture. Without that, any culture is lost. History teaches us that the Roman culture collapsed because it stepped away from natural law and common sense. We know that we would be speaking German today rather than English if we had not been prepared to confront the evil of the Nazi regime and Italian fascism and the empire of the rising sun with what? Biblical truth. Truth with a capital T. Objective facts. A constitution that was grounded in those self-evident truths that are endowed to us by what? Not government, not you, not me, not society, not BLM, not critical race theory, but self-evident truths that are endowed to us by our Creator. That's the solution, to return to those time-tested truths.
Okay, we're going to have to take a quick break here. When we come back, let's talk about some of the good, some of the things that you put in your new book, lessons that you've learned that we need to pass on to the next generation. Okay, so we've discussed some of the bad, some of the problems that we see in our culture, but we also have solutions. So let's talk the good, or what we can do to address the problems. Dr. Piper, your new book is titled Grow Up. How do we do that?
Well, first of all, you need to acknowledge that being a grown-up, if you will, is a good thing. And that stagnating in adolescence, in childhood, is a bad thing. Do we want to live in perpetual childishness? Or do we want to accept the responsibility and the challenge of adulthood and approach it with courage? Now, notice I use some key words there: responsibility, courage, challenge. I'm assuming that those things are good. I'm assuming that iron sharpening iron is a good thing. I'm assuming that we are tested by fire and refined by it. I'm assuming that the old athletic axiom, no pain, no gain, brings with it some wisdom. All of those things imply moving from childhood, whether it be spiritual, intellectual, or even physical childhood, to adult maturity. My book is not just written to millennials. My book is written to 24-year-olds and 42-year-olds. My book is written to 52-year-olds and 62-year-olds, because we all need to recognize what St. Paul said in his letter to the church of Ephesus. Speaking the truth in love, you are to grow up. That comes right out of the book of Ephesians, Paul's letter to the church of Ephesus. Speaking the truth in love, you are to grow up. So what do I think the beautiful solution is here, the good solution here, the good life versus the safe life? Truth and love. Let's talk about those two things. One of the chapters of my book, I title it, You're Not Webster. And that title is a reference to Webster's dictionary. And the premise of that chapter is words have definitions. Words mean something. 2 + 2 does not equal green. 2 + 2 = 4. Doesn't equal 5. It's not a color. It's a formula, a mathematical formula that has an objective answer. There's a truth with a capital T behind that question. What is 2 + 2? In other words are defined, or otherwise we couldn't be communicating right now. You wouldn't understand me, I wouldn't understand you. You couldn't disagree with me because it would make no difference. So we have to understand that we're not Webster, that there are objective standards out there to pursue, that there's a measuring rod outside of those things being measured, or we can do no measuring. C.S. Lewis. Truth and love, very quickly. Truth, Jesus tells us he is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no man comes to the Father but by him. Os Guinness tells us that truth is true even if everyone disagrees with it, and falsehood is false even if everyone agrees with it. Truth is true, and that's just the end of it. In other words, truth is true. I don't care what you think about it. You shouldn't care what I think about it. Truth judges both of us. So truth is an objective fact. Jesus himself is that truth. Biblical truths endure. They're unchangeable, immutable, time-tested. They're true. Now, love. On your anniversary, did you send your wife an I tolerate you card? The answer is no. You sent her a card suggesting that you love her. And the reason you did that is because tolerance is an inferior virtue. Tolerance doesn't say, I like you. Tolerance doesn't say, I love you. Tolerance says, I could care less about you. Do what you want. I'll tolerate you. Christian charity, love, is a superior virtue. Whereas tolerance says, I couldn't care less what you do. I'll tolerate it. Christian love says, I care deeply about what you do. I love you. Now stop. Tolerance enables, whereas love doesn't. If you want people to grow up and if you want to show people that you love them, then you need to stop tolerating their sin. That's the solution. Teach the time-tested truths that challenge people to step out of their childish ways and speak the truth in love and grow up.
Well, that's powerful. We need the common language, and we need to take our words back. Sam Sorbo, our mutual friend, has written a great book, Words for Warriors. But you're right, I'm not Webster. I can't define what the words mean. There should be an objective definition and we have one. It's called a dictionary, and yet people want to change words and meanings all the time to suit their own needs. What other lesson? Give me another lesson that you've learned in life that we can pass along.
Okay, here's a quick one. Another chapter out of my book, Grow Up. Don't fall in the pool. It's the story about Narcissus and how he's gazing at his reflection in the pool to the point where he becomes so mesmerized with his own beauty, infatuated with himself, that he does what? He slips, he falls in, and he drowns. The moral of the story is this: if you gaze at yourself in the mirror to the extent that you like the God you see there more than the God you see in the Bible, you're going to die. You're going to die in your self-aggrandizement, your self-infatuation. You're going to die in your narcissism. So don't slip and fall in the pool. Recognize that there is a God and it's not you. Recognize that what you see in the mirror is always going to be fallible and flawed, and what you see in the Bible is the only standard of perfection that you will ever find. The critical race theory, for example, is a worldview that's always elevating the self and always blaming everybody else. You elevate yourself to be as God, and everybody else should be bowing and worshiping to your feelings, your offenses. You should be affirmed. You essentially should be worshiped because you have declared yourself to be as God. This is not a recipe for freedom. This is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, no question. I love that chapter because you relate the story, the narcissist story, to the very sad reality that there are people every year who are taking selfies at the edge of a cliff, and they're so focused on themselves they fall off to their death. And I think that just really points out that strong lesson that you've made. Now, you also said life isn't safe, but it's good. We have about a minute. What does that mean?
I'm referring to C.S. Lewis's lesson from the Chronicles of Narnia, where he tells us that the great lion Aslan is not safe, but he's good. The great lion of Jesus Christ is not safe, but he's good. Now let's do the Piper paraphrase on a couple other things. The great lion of the ivory tower is not safe, but it's good. The great lion of the Constitution is not safe, but it's good. The great lion of the church should not be safe, but it's good. The great lion of freedom and liberty is not safe, but it's good. There's a huge difference between goodness and safety, and if we will accept the inferior things of life, the second things of life, rather than focus on the first things, if we're going to be too easily satisfied with safety rather than pushing forward for the first thing of goodness, God's goodness, then we will be controlled by whoever gives us that second thing. We will never reach maturity. We will never grow up.
Well, we're going to grow up because we're going to read your book. We're going to share it widely. We're going to come back after another break, and we're going to get down to the rubber meets the road part of this. So let's take a break, and we'll be back with Dr. Everett Piper. So we're in the economic war room with Dr. Everett Piper. We've been talking about culture. We've been talking about the way that we're governing. All of that is under assault by narcissism and a lot of other flaws of humanity that we're not just tolerating, but we're actually amplifying. And that has some serious economic implications. It has implications for our nation, for our economy, for your investment portfolio. So Dr. Piper, how do we grow up in regard to finance and economics, individually and as a nation?
Well, do we assume that someone's going to take care of us? Is that our highest good? Is that our first thing? Or have we been taught by good teachers, grandparents, parents, a good pastor, a professor that actually believes in personal responsibility? Have we been taught to take responsibility, take charge of our own lives? If we're going to be too easily satisfied, let's use C.S. Lewis's analogy of mud pies in the back alley versus a vacation at the beach. C.S. Lewis challenges us and says that we have become too easily satisfied with clay versus brass or gold, that we're satisfied with the mud, the dirt, the clay of sitting in the back alley and just making mud pies, that has become the end goal of all of life. And we're sitting in the back alley, supposedly happy and content, making these mud pies as little children when we have forgotten that we could have a vacation at the beach. We could move beyond that dirty, childish play to something that's grand and glorious, God's gold for our lives. A vacation on the beach, looking at the ocean, gazing at the stars, enjoying God's creation and enjoying God. When you're looking down at the mud and the dirt, you're not going to see much about creation and God's wonder and God's beauty. But if you're standing on the beach, enjoying it and taking it all in, you are going to grow. So I would use Lewis's analogy here as to what we should be doing financially. Are you going to be too easily satisfied with the government, the mud, the dirt, the government taking care of you and just printing more money, fake money, monopoly money, it's worthless, and throwing that at the problem, and it just makes you feel good, even though they're telling you to wear a mask, stay at home, you can't go to church, you can't go to a restaurant. Is that the good life, or is that a safe life? That's the point of the book, goodness or safety. And it applies to finances. Who's going to take care of you, yourself or the government, as well as any other aspect of life?
No, you've got a great point there. Who's going to take care of you? Where we're headed, if we don't arrest this attitude, is number one, we're going to say, I want that vacation on the beach, but I don't want to work for it, so I'll put it on my credit card. And we're just going to pile up debt until we run out of debt. And when we run out of debt, the government's going to step in and say, you know what, we're going to have to take all your savings, all your investments, and we'll have to invest them in the government. They're safe. Treasury bonds are safe. And you can put your money, give your money to the government. They'll just be taking it because they've piled up so much debt they don't have another way to pay for it, but they'll be cratering investment portfolios. The risky but rewarding portfolio might be to invest in businesses in the future and so forth. So I think you make a great point. Individually, we've got to take responsibility and not value safety so highly that it means we exclude taking chances and taking risks. What about as a nation, though? What are we going to do when we pile up all this debt? Where does our nation head?
Well, and I'm not an economist, and you are, so I'm going to answer your question with a question here. And I'm being serious. Aren't we all essentially living on plastic right now? Because we've allowed our government to print so much money that it has devalued everything that you've worked for and I've worked for. Isn't it becoming essentially worthless on a minute-by-minute basis with every new bill that Congress passes to just go print trillions and trillions of new money? Where'd it come from? Where did that money come from? So in reality, because our electorate has allowed a Congress and a president and a vice president to lie about our finances so egregiously, we're all basically living in a fake economy right now, aren't we?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, we're approaching $30 trillion in debt. If the infrastructure package passes, and they're talking about that, that's another $2 to $3 trillion on top of that. That's about $100,000 per person. It's $250,000 per household. Every family owes $250,000. So you think you've saved up some money and saved up some wealth. Well, your portion of the federal debt as a household is about $250,000. So how much money have you really saved? No, you're right. But the problem is the economy hasn't reflected this yet. We have reported consumer price indexes that are saying, inflation's low. What it feels like, and really probably is Wile E. Coyote has run off the edge of the cliff, but just hasn't recognized it yet. So he's floating in air, and then one day we're going to realize it and we're going to fall. I think it was Hemingway who said, how does one go broke? And the answer is, paraphrased, it is very slowly, then all at once. And I think that's kind of where we are. If we don't grow up in regard to finances very quickly, we have a catastrophe waiting on the other side.
Again, we need to grow up and stop expecting dad, big brother, the government, someone else, bigger than us, to take care of us. We need to recognize I don't want daddy's check anymore because that's a fake way for me to live. I need to go get a job and earn my own keep. My dad taught me that. Get out of the house. You just graduated from high school. Become a man, grow up, take care of yourself. I'm not going to keep writing checks for you any longer. And you know what? That was one of the best lessons he ever could have taught me. Unfortunately, today, I'm not sure parents are willing to teach their kids that lesson. And unfortunately, the government is too eager to perpetuate that infantile, adolescent attitude of, we'll just cover the check for you. We'll take care of you.
All right, so we've got some problems. There are solutions if we will take advantage of them. Doing the right thing, there's time-tested, proven principles. But I got one more question for you. We've got another minute left or so. What gives you hope? Where do you have hope?
My hope is in the church. Jesus promised us that the gates of hell would not prevail against his church. Now, as you know, I'm very critical of the evangelical church today with a lowercase c. I'm critical of other church traditions with a lowercase c. But what I do know is that the remnant, the faithful church, the biblical church, the obedient church, the church that's truly born again and trusting in God as God and not pretending that they themselves are that God, that church will win. And the reason I know that beyond a shadow of a doubt is Jesus Christ has proven himself to be the Word made flesh and dwelling among us, God himself, and he won't break his word. The church will prevail.
That's great hope, and thank you, Dr. Piper. I also want to thank you for the book and highly recommend it to all of our viewers. It makes a perfect read for yourself. We need to all grow up ourselves, but it's also a great graduation gift. We're heading into graduation season. That's the perfect gift to hand a student that's just graduated. Now, we're going to provide notes and a link to Dr. Piper's website as well as his book, Grow Up, in our Economic Battle Plan. And you can get your free copy of this at economicwarroom.com. We started with an understanding that the United States is just one of many players in the world, and other nations are watching. If we grow up, we may be able to avert bad conflicts with some of these other nations. But what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.